My name is Rebecca Martinez, and I used to be a professional cave explorer. Used to be, because after what I found beneath the Daniel Boone National Forest, I can't look at a cave entrance anymore without hearing voices echoing up from the dark. For 12 years, the underground was my second home. Cold stone walls, the steady drip of water, the beam of my headlamp slicing through a darkness that had existed for millions of years. But now, whenever I see a cave mouth, I feel like it's staring right back at me. The darkness breathes. The silence whispers my name. I stepped into a place no human was ever meant to witness. And if you remember only one thing from my story, let it be this. There are places beneath the earth that should stay sealed forever. Even after I gave up caving, sold my gear, and walked away from the mountains, the voices never left me. On quiet nights, when I pass through a deserted parking garage or walk past the entrance to a subway, I hear them again. From deep storm drains, from cracks in old basements, the voices rise warm, familiar, yet cold enough to send chills down my spine. It's Maria's voice, my sister's, my grandmother's, even friends long gone. All of them whisper my name, calling me back. I know I'm standing on the surface, beneath the yellow glow of streetlights, but every breath in the shadows makes me feel like I'm still trapped underground in that phosphorescent chamber where the voices never stop. Back in graduate school, studying geology, I fell in love with the underground. The first time I squeezed through a narrow passage and shined my light on massive stalactites, it felt like stepping into a spell. From then on, I dedicated 12 years to spelunking. I walked through the vast chambers of Mammoth Cave, where the ceiling vanishes into endless dark, and I tested myself in the vertical pits of Alabama, where a single mistake could cost you everything. I earned my cave rescue certification, always carried the right gear, and followed one unbreakable rule: never explore alone. Those principles are the line between making it home safely and a descent that never ends. During my doctoral research in Kentucky, I spent weeks interviewing locals about old cave systems. One morning, in a small diner in the town of Hazard, I met Jimmy Caldwell. He was well into his 80s, thin, wiry, with sharp eyes that seemed to hold an entire lifetime of memories about these mountains. Amid the smell of strong black coffee and the clatter of silverware, Jimmy told me about a place that, in his words, isn't on any map. A hidden cave system tucked behind a waterfall on Bent Creek Ridge. He said his father had taken him there as a boy, but he'd never gone back. The way he spoke, slow, heavy, deliberate, made the hairs on my arms rise. That place, something about it just isn't right. At the time, all I felt was excitement. An unmapped cave system? To me, that was scientific treasure. I didn't realize that what seemed like an innocent conversation was the doorway into the most terrifying experience of my life. Jimmy leaned closer, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. It's where things go to die, and sometimes they don't stay dead. His eyes darkened when he said it, as if the memory itself still clung to him. The diner suddenly felt stifling. The background chatter and clinking of dishes seemed to fade, leaving only his cold warning hanging in the air. I should have listened. I should have known that no caver ever wants to hear those kinds of words about a cave. But instead, all I felt was a rush of adrenaline. A cave system never documented, never surveyed, that was the holy grail of spelunking, and a golden opportunity for my dissertation. I smiled, nodded, and ignored his warning. I didn't realize that dismissing his words that day was the first step into a nightmare I'd never fully escape. I started my journey on a sweltering morning. Backpack heavy on my shoulders, boots sinking into damp soil, I followed game trails and faint tracks that only wild animals seemed to know. The path stretched for nearly half a day, leading me through dry creek beds, sheer moss-covered cliffs, and forests so thick that sunlight only cut through in pale, broken shafts. Each step echoed dully, swallowed by a silence that made me feel as though the mountains themselves were watching me. By noon, when the sun filtered through a narrow valley, I heard the roar of water. And there it was, exactly as Jimmy had described, a waterfall, nearly 40 feet high, plunging into a deep pool below. White spray rose in clouds, and the sound reverberated across the limestone walls, a natural symphony that was both awe-inspiring and unbearably heavy. I stood there, sweat mixed with dust running down my face, staring at the waterfall like a massive curtain hiding a secret door behind it. My heart pounded, I knew I had found it, the entrance to a cave that didn't exist on any map. But as I moved closer, I realized the opening Jimmy had described was still completely submerged beneath the pool. The force of the water crashing down blocked any possible way inside. I knew there was no way I could risk diving in under those conditions. So I set up camp nearby, on a small patch of level ground surrounded by cliffs and forest. For 2 weeks, I waited. Every day, I logged surface geology, photographed the limestone formations, and watched the waterline inch lower and lower. At night, the roar of the waterfall echoed through the forest like a constant drumbeat. Sometimes it jolted me awake, and in that thunder, I swore I could hear something else, syllables hidden in the rush of water. Not quite human, but not entirely natural either. Day after day, I lived alone in that wild valley, watching the moonlight turn the waterfall into a silver curtain, cold and otherworldly. I waited, and it felt like the darkness was waiting for me in return, waiting for the moment the water would thin enough to reveal the hidden passage. By the end of the second week, the falls had shrunk to little more than a silver thread, and that's when I finally saw it, an opening. A black fissure about 6 feet high, and just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. The entrance had revealed itself at last. That morning, as the sun rose above the ridge, the sound of the waterfall shifted, no longer a deafening roar, but a faint trickle splashing into the pool. And behind that shimmering curtain, I saw it. A gaping black mouth, roughly 6 feet tall and 4 feet wide, just big enough for a person to stoop and step inside. I froze. The thin veil of water rippled, pulling back just enough to reveal a depthless darkness beyond, like an unblinking eye in the earth, staring straight at me. Droplets echoed in the valley. Sunlight glinted off the water's edge, making the cave entrance gleam like a silver-edged abyss. And in that exact moment, I knew I had found the door Jimmy had warned me about. But instead of fear, something else stirred inside me. Part of me wanted to step in immediately. Another part whispered that I had just awakened something that should have been left asleep. I had promised myself 100 times I would never break the safety rules, never go alone, never scout without a team. But standing there, face to face with that black maw behind the waterfall, every rule I had ever sworn by suddenly felt fragile. I told myself it would just be a quick look, just a preliminary check. If I didn't find anything unusual, I'd turn back, gather a full team, and come back properly prepared. I adjusted my headlamp, checked my carabiner, packed a spare light, a few energy bars, my radio, and the emergency beacon. Everything I had was in perfect working order. I thought, what could possibly go wrong? Behind me, the drip of water sounded like a countdown. I ducked low, stepped through the thin curtain of the falls, and in that instant, the cold darkness swallowed me whole. I didn't realize that first step into Bent Creek Ridge was also the step that carried me out of the world I thought I knew, and into a place with no way back. The entrance tunnel was a tight crawl, about 50 feet long, my shoulders brushing against cold, damp limestone. My own breath bounced back into my chest in the cramped space, and then suddenly, the passage opened wide. My headlamp swept out into a cavern so massive the beam dissolved into blackness above and on both sides. Towering stalactites hung like glass spears, glittering as if they had grown straight out of the night itself. The walls sparkled with mineral deposits, scattering my light into 1,000 tiny reflections, like a buried sky full of stars. But what froze me in place wasn't the size. It was the silence. No dripping water, no flutter of bats, not even the faint groan of shifting stone. Just the raw echo of my heartbeat, pounding back at me, amplified as though the cave itself was listening. The entire chamber felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for me to make the next move. And in that moment, I knew I had stepped into a place that was never meant for people. I took a few more steps across the smooth limestone floor, my beam cutting a pale circle ahead. And then, I stopped cold. The ground wasn't just dust and scattered rock fragments. It was bones, hundreds of them, bleached white, spread across the cavern floor like a macabre carpet. There were animal remains, deer, bear, fox. But mixed among them were shapes that couldn't be mistaken. Human skulls, femurs, rib cages, brittle and chalky, coated in a white mineral crust. They looked as if they'd been here for centuries, maybe longer. What sent ice down my spine wasn't just their presence, it was their arrangement. They weren't random, they weren't washed there by water. They had been placed lined in circles, laid in deliberate rows, arranged as if part of some repeated ritual. Some animal skeletons had even been aligned with human bones, interlocked in strange patterns I couldn't begin to understand. I knelt down, my hand trembling as I reached out and touched a skull. It was ice cold, brittle, and for a split second, I felt as though dozens of empty eye sockets were staring back at me in the dim flicker of my headlamp. The cave was silent, so silent that the weight of it pressed into my ears until I could hear nothing but the rush of blood pounding inside my head. I was still crouched over the pile of bones, my light shaking in my hand, when suddenly, a sound broke through. Rebecca, a woman's voice. Clear, drawn out, rising from somewhere deep within the cave. My chest clenched. For that instant, every sense in my body froze. This cave had been dead silent, no dripping water, no movement, nothing. And yet now, a voice carried through, stretching across the stone walls, splintering into warped echoes that overlapped again and again. I shot to my feet, swinging my beam toward the black passage at the far end of the chamber. Nothing, just endless void. But the voice, it was unmistakable. Soft, feminine, calling my name. Not wind, not shifting rock. This was a call. Rebecca. It came again, closer this time, as if someone was standing just beyond the edge of my light. My grip tightened, cold sweat sliding down my spine. I felt pulled in two directions at once, part of me compelled to step forward, part of me screaming to run. I stood frozen, heart hammering against my ribs, when the voice came again, this time with words that hollowed me out. Rebecca, go deeper. We're waiting. I went rigid. Because it wasn't just any voice now. It was Maria's, my sister's, the one who had died in a car accident 3 years earlier. The tone was so familiar that every syllable, every breath turned my blood to ice. I heard the same gentleness she used when comforting me as a child. I heard the echo of the laughter that once filled our home. But Maria had never set foot in a cave. She had never even been to Kentucky. And more than anything, she was gone. I had held her photo in my hands at the memorial. I told myself it wasn't possible, that it had to be an auditory illusion, some kind of echo phenomenon. But my heart knew the truth. It was her voice. And it was calling me, pulling me deeper into the darkness, into the very place every instinct screamed I should not go. My headlamp swept across damp stone walls, shadows stretching like living things. And in the middle of that suffocating silence, Maria's voice came again, so warm, almost soothing, like a lullaby. Rebecca. I barely had time to breathe before other voices joined in, blending into the cave's heavy echoes. Rebecca, don't stop. When you stand, keep going. You'll find what's waiting. I recognized them instantly. Dr. Peterson, my graduate advisor, who had died in a cave-in 2 years earlier. Sarah, my childhood friend, taken by illness. And then, my grandmother, who had left me when I was only 12. All of them people I had lost, voices I thought I would only ever hear in memory, were now rising from the stone around me, calling my name, urging me deeper into the earth. My pulse hammered, logic screaming this couldn't be real. I knew about echoes, how wind through cracks could twist sound into strange patterns. But no science could explain why these voices carried every detail, every breath, every familiar tone of love and comfort. They weren't distant, they weren't alien. They were warm, tender, intimate, so familiar that I felt like a lost child being guided home. And then, cutting through the dark, I heard one last voice, my grandmother's, gentle but unyielding. Go, Rebecca. Deeper, and you will see. His action, into storm. 12 years of caving experience had taught me one unshakable rule. When instinct speaks, you listen. And right then, every nerve in my body was screaming, turn back, leave. Do not take another step. The signs were all there, the unnatural silence, the carefully placed bones, and now the voices of the dead, each one a warning as clear as red paint on stone. This place is not meant for the living. But at the same time, my heart trembled at the warmth of those voices. It was the voice of my sister, my grandmother, my mentor, people I had loved and lost forever. They weren't threatening. They weren't pushing me away. Instead, they were gentle, tender, as if opening their arms to welcome me home. I felt like I was standing at a crossroads. One path was cold, sharp reason, demanding that I turn back. The other was the embrace of familiar voices, promising reunion, promising eternal discovery. And I did what every rule in my profession warned against. I kept going, letting my heart lead instead of my mind. I chose the largest passage. My headlamp cut into the darkness as though I were stepping onto a road with no end. With each step, the slope carried me deeper, and the depth gauge on my wrist began climbing past the water table, proof that I was descending into a space that shouldn't even exist. The air grew heavier. A thin, icy mist slid into every breath I took. The stone walls began to change, no longer just ordinary limestone. Flowstone cascaded down like frozen waterfalls, while massive columns rose like pillars of an ancient cathedral. In some places, the ceiling soared so high my light was swallowed completely, leaving nothing but suffocating blackness above. In others, crystals erupted in dense clusters, scattering the beam into thousands of glittering shards like a buried night sky. The deeper I went, the stronger the sense grew. This was no ordinary cave carved by nature. It felt like a colossal structure shaped, arranged by an unseen hand for a purpose I didn't dare imagine. Each footstep echoed strangely, stretching longer than it should, as though the sound wasn't just bouncing off stone, but slipping away into some other space further, deeper. After hours of walking down into the dark, I suddenly realized the space ahead was opening wider than before. I stepped forward and froze. In front of me stretched a cavern so vast I could only compare it to a stadium. The ceiling vaulted high above, vanishing into a blackness my light could never reach. But what stole my breath wasn't the size, it was the light. Not from my lamp, not from any equipment. The very walls themselves were glowing, pulsing with a soft, pale phosphorescence, steady, green-blue, bright enough that I no longer needed my headlamp at all. The glow clung to every vein of stone, weaving through the stalactites until the entire cavern shimmered like another world. It wasn't the kind of light I had ever known in nature. It felt alive, as if the walls themselves were breathing, exhaling an ancient presence that had waited for millennia. I stood deep beneath the earth, surrounded by a radiance I couldn't explain, and for the first time in my life, I felt I was no longer in the world I knew. I had crossed a boundary. I stepped forward, and the space before me opened so wide it stole my breath. A chamber the size of a stadium stretched out in front of me. The ceiling soared so high that my light was swallowed completely, vanishing into the suffocating blackness above. I had never seen any underground space of this scale, but what stunned me most were the walls. They weren't dark like every other cave I had ever explored. Instead, the stone itself glowed with a faint, bluish phosphorescence, soft and steady, like ghostly fire. The glow was bright enough to reveal every detail around me without the aid of my lamp. The entire cavern pulsed with that strange light. Not just light, but something that felt like the breath of the earth itself, seeping from every crack, spreading evenly across the space. In that moment, I realized I had wandered into a different world, a place no longer bound by the rules I once knew. And then, from the phosphorescent haze, faces began to emerge. Familiar faces. Maria stepped forward, her eyes shining as if the accident had never happened. My grandmother sat nearby, her warm smile unchanged from the days of my childhood. And Dr. Peterson, still wearing the mud-stained field clothes he'd been trapped in when the cave-in took his life. I stumbled back, my lips trembling. This can't be. You're all gone. Maria smiled gently, holding out her hand. Death is just another passage, Rebecca. Like the caves you love so much, it only opens another doorway leading into another journey. My grandmother's voice followed, soft as wind. We've found the final chamber, the place where every passage comes together. Peterson rose to his feet, his gaze locking deep into mine. This system is older than human civilization. It was here before history was ever written, and it has always drawn seekers, those who cannot resist the pull of darkness. This last Kuidburing Quaus. His words echoed through the phosphorescent chamber, blending with the cold glow that clung to the cavern walls. I stood there, my heart clenched tight, torn between the desperate urge to deny and the aching desire to believe. My eyes swept across the chamber, the bluish light washing over every face seated in silence. At first, I focused only on the ones I knew: Maria, my grandmother, Peterson. But then, I saw what I hadn't noticed before. Not all of them were human. Shapes at the far edges of the cavern froze the breath in my chest. They sat in meditation poses like the others, but their forms were unmistakably wrong. One had an elongated skull, cheekbones jutting sharp, eye sockets so deep they looked like black wells. Another's arms bent at impossible angles, joints twisted in ways that no human anatomy could account for. In that moment, I understood they had once been explorers too. But not human ones. They belonged to species long gone from the surface world, extinct for tens of thousands, maybe millions of years, and they had been drawn here, just like me. A chill shot down my spine as the thought hit. This cave didn't just call to humans. It called to anything that had ever tried to burrow deeper into the earth, and none of them had ever left. Maria stood and stepped toward me. In the phosphorescent glow, her face was unchanged, still gentle, still as familiar as the day she was alive. She reached out her hand, her fingers cool yet heavy, with a terrifying weight as they touched mine. "Rebecca," she whispered, her voice warm, almost like a lullaby. "No more loneliness, no more searching, only exploration. Forever." Her words rang in my mind like a lullaby of endings. My fear dulled, smothered by a sweetness so overwhelming it nearly stole my breath. I felt the warmth of her hand, the very warmth I had ached for in the 3 years since she was gone. In that moment, my heart softened. A part of me wanted to give in, to sit down among those faces, to never again be parted from the people I loved. But my reason screamed. If I stayed, I would never go back. Maria's grip tightened around mine, icy and yet, impossibly. Warmth seeped into my fingers. The sensation was so real it tore at my chest. For 3 years, I had longed for that touch, and now, it was right in front of me. For that one fleeting moment, I wanted to surrender, to stay, to sit among them and leave behind the endless solitude of the surface world. Here, there was family. Here, there was my mentor. Here, there were faces I knew. And here, I would never have to lose anyone again. But when my eyes flicked down to the strap across my chest, I saw the emergency beacon still flashing its tiny light. A small signal, a fragile connection to the world above. Suddenly, I remembered everything waiting for me. My dissertation, my students, my life on the surface. I remembered sunlight, wind in the trees, the smell of soil after rain. Ordinary things, small things, but real. The temptation in my hand was unbearably sweet, but if I stayed, I knew I would never return to the world I still belonged to. I tore my hand from Maria's grip, my heart pounding, and grabbed the beacon on my chest harness. My fingers shook as I slammed the red button. The signal light pulsed faster, each flash a tiny lifeline tying me back to the surface. Without another second of hesitation, I spun and ran toward the passage I had come from. My footsteps echoed sharp against the stone, my headlamp scattering across the glowing walls. I didn't dare look back, but behind me, the voices rose all at once. No longer gentle, not angry either. They blended together, a chorus heavy and mournful, a sound that made my spine go numb. "Rebecca, don't go. Stay with us. You belong here." Each voice, Maria, my grandmother, Dr. Peterson, and countless others, some familiar, some unknown, merged into one vast echo that filled the cavern. They weren't hateful. They were sorrowful, as if I were betraying a family that had opened its arms to me. I clenched my teeth and pushed harder, running faster. But in the darkness behind me, the chorus followed, sad and unrelenting, clinging to every breath I took. I reached the place where the entrance should have been. But the passage was gone. In its place were dozens of openings, dark gashes in the stone wall, each one black as a bottomless pit, as though the cave itself were shifting around me. I grabbed the rope I had fixed on my way down. It should have led me back to the waterfall entrance, but this time, it pulled me into unfamiliar corridors I had never seen before. Each chamber I stumbled into grew stranger, larger, filled with stone formations that didn't match the geology of this region at all. Time itself seemed to warp in the dark. My watch read just over 3 hours underground, but my body felt as though I had been walking for days. My throat was dry, my stomach knotted with hunger, and exhaustion pressed on me so heavily I nearly collapsed. With every step, it became clearer. I wasn't just moving through a cave system. I was being guided through a living labyrinth, something that knew how to shift and reshape itself just to keep me inside. And in that distortion, a cold truth settled over me. This place didn't want me to leave. When my strength was nearly gone, I caught sight of a faint glow ahead. Light. Natural light. My heart pounded. I dropped to my hands and knees, clawing through damp soil and loose rock. Eyes locked on that sliver of brightness the way a drowning person locks onto the shore. At last, I dragged myself through a narrow fissure, sweat and dirt plastered to my skin, and tumbled out onto grass drenched in sunlight. The brilliance of the sun stabbed at my eyes. Painful but glorious, the most beautiful light I had ever seen. I turned back. Behind me yawned a cave mouth I had never seen before, a dark opening carved into the side of the mountain. It was nothing like the entrance hidden behind the waterfall, and when I switched on my GPS, my stomach dropped. The device claimed I was standing at an impossible set of coordinates, a location that, according to every geological map, should have been solid rock hundreds of feet underground. But I was undeniably on the surface. The sun burned warm against my skin, the wind moved through my hair, and beside me, a small creek trickled through a valley I had never seen on any map. I had no idea how I'd gotten out. All I knew was this: that doorway hadn't led me back to the world I remembered. It had taken me outside, but left me with the suffocating certainty that I had stepped out of a place that doesn't belong to any map or to any reality we understand. It took me 2 full days of following streams and ridgelines before I stumbled onto a road that led back to civilization. Locals saw me emerge from the forest, filthy, clothes torn, looking like a survivor of some disaster. When I reported everything, coordinates, descriptions of the entrance, even the details of the Bent Creek Ridge waterfall, the only response I got was, "That area doesn't exist on any survey." I returned to the diner where I'd first met Jimmy Caldwell, but they swore no one by that name had ever worked there. I asked the locals, every single one shook their head, as if Jimmy had never existed at all. After that, I sold all my gear, abandoned my dissertation, and took a teaching job in a distant state with no notable cave systems. I told people I'd retired from spelunking. But the truth was simpler. I couldn't bring myself to step into another cave ever again. And yet, even after walking away, the voices still find me. On quiet nights, passing through parking garages, or when water rushes through storm drains, I still hear them: Maria, my grandmother, Peterson, whispering my name, calling to me from the depths below. Maybe I chose to return to the sunlight, to live an ordinary life. But a part of me is still trapped down there, in that eternal phosphorescent chamber, with those who chose to stay forever.
You're listening to Untold 365 Scary True Stories. If you enjoy this video, hit the like button, click subscribe, and comment the number 2 so we know you want more chilling stories.
My name is Sarah. For the past 15 years, I've spent my life roaming the trails of the Appalachian Mountains, the oldest mountain range in America. I'm not some reckless thrill seeker or a weekend hiker chasing photos for social media. I'm a certified wilderness guide, fully trained and licensed. I know how to read topographic maps, use GPS, handle emergencies, set up camp in storms, and survive when conditions turn harsh. Every trip, I carry full gear: a survival knife, water filter, GPS, flashlight, tent, and a first aid kit. I'm used to being alone out there nights when there isn't another soul within miles of me, and never once had I felt afraid. For me, the mountains have always been a refuge, the one place where I felt truly alive, away from the chaos of everyday life. This trip was supposed to be simple: a 3-day solo hike along a remote section of the Blue Ridge Mountains in Virginia. It's the kind of trail that maybe a handful of people touch each month. I'd done this exact route twice before I knew every bend, every water source, every small patch of ground flat enough to pitch a tent. That familiarity gave me confidence. I was sure this would be another peaceful escape. I wanted distance from the city, from the noise and the clutter, just the sound of wind cutting through ridgelines and the scent of damp earth rising from the forest floor. I pictured maple leaves just starting to blaze red, morning sunlight streaming between the branches, crisp October air filling my lungs. In my mind, everything was under control. But looking back now, I realized that false sense of security is exactly what opened the door for the nightmare to begin. I set out on an October morning. The air was sharp enough to wake every nerve in my chest, but still held the fading warmth of fall. Sunlight poured through the canopy of yellow and red leaves, painting the trail in shifting patterns. Every step crunched through dry leaves, blending with the rush of wind slipping along the mountainside. It felt like I was walking into another world, pure, clean, untouched. After about 8 miles, I reached a small clearing beside a clear mountain stream. Water trickled over moss-covered rocks, echoing softly across the quiet hollow like background music no one else could hear. I set up my tent, built a small fire, filtered fresh water. Everything was neat, exactly as planned. Leaning back against a boulder, I let my body relax, my heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of the water and the breeze. In that moment, I felt perfect peace. I truly believed the next days would be just as calm, until night fell, and the mountains showed a different face. As darkness settled, the forest turned pitch black, broken only by the flicker of my small campfire. At first, I expected the usual course of the woods, crickets, owls, the scurry of small animals through the brush. But that night, there was nothing, not a single sound of life. The silence pressed down, so heavy it warped every noise I made. When I shifted, the crinkle of my jacket sounded unnaturally loud. When I stirred the fire, the crack of wood echoed in ways that made the trees feel hollow. I crawled into my tent around 10, trying to sleep, but again and again, I woke not from cold, not from dreams, but from one unmistakable feeling. Someone was watching me. It echoed unnaturally, like the sound bouncing inside an empty room. When I stirred the fire, the sharp crack of dry wood traveled farther than it should have, rolling out into the dark forest, as if the trees themselves were amplifying it. I crawled into my sleeping bag around 10, trying to force myself to rest. But the entire night, I kept waking up, not from the cold, not from bad dreams, but from one overwhelming feeling someone was watching me. It was like a pair of invisible eyes pressing through the thin fabric of the tent, boring straight into my back, tightening every nerve in my body until my chest felt heavy and slow. Each time I woke, I just lay still, holding my breath, waiting for some sound to confirm what I felt. But all I got in return was that same suffocating silence, thick, heavy, absolute. The next morning, the sky was clear, sunlight dripping through the leaves and painting the trail in gold. I told myself, maybe it had just been first-night jitters, the kind of unease even experienced hikers sometimes feel. I broke camp early and continued deeper into the mountains. By noon, I stopped on a rocky overlook to drink some water and take in the valley stretching out below. That's when I caught it, a dark shape slipping between the trees in the corner of my vision, maybe 100 yards away. I whipped my head toward it, but the forest was still, silent, nothing but unmoving trunks. I forced myself to believe it had been a deer, maybe a black bear passing through. But an hour later, there was no mistaking it. This time, I saw it clearly. A tall figure, dressed in dark clothing, moving parallel to me about 50 meters off the trail to my left. I froze, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. Gathering every bit of nerve I had, I called out, "Hello, is someone there?" My voice carried through the trees, and then vanished. No answer. Not a branch breaking. Not a bird. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like the entire forest was holding its breath. By late afternoon, I reached my second planned campsite, a clearing I'd used before. It was surrounded on 3 sides by towering hemlocks, forming natural walls that once made me feel secure. But this time, they looked more like prison bars closing in around me. As I unpacked my gear, something on the ground near the fire ring caught my eye. Footprints. Fresh ones. Much larger than mine, with a completely different tread pattern. I quickly checked the soles of my own boots, no match at all. And what unsettled me most was the pattern they formed. They didn't lead in or out. Instead, they circled the campsite over and over again, as if someone had been pacing, studying, watching, and then disappeared. I searched the edges of the clearing, scanning for any trail where the prints might have continued. But there was nothing. No sign of where they came from, and no sign of where they went. That second night, I made the decision not to build a fire. Some instinct deep inside me screamed that any light would only make me easier to find. Instead, I ate a little cold food inside my tent, every bite sounding unnaturally loud, echoing in the heavy silence of the forest. As the hours crept toward midnight, I finally heard it. At first, it was faint, almost easy to dismiss. But then it grew clearer. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, pressing down into the soft earth as they circled my tent. They weren't hurried. They weren't clumsy. Whoever or whatever was out there moved with a steady, measured pace, circling me like they had all the time in the world. I lay frozen, every muscle locked, my chest tightening as my heartbeat thundered so violently I thought it might break me open. At times, the steps stopped, and the silence that followed was so crushing it made the air feel heavy, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. Then, without warning, the footsteps would start again, keeping the exact same distance from my tent. What terrified me most was that sometimes the sounds came from more than one direction at once, as if it wasn't just one figure out there, but 2, 3, maybe more. Yet there were no voices, not a whisper. Only those steady, relentless footsteps, circling again and again in the darkness. I stayed rigid inside my sleeping bag, hand locked around my survival knife, eyes fixed on the paper-thin fabric of the tent wall. I knew that at any moment, all it would take was the slightest ripple in that fabric, and everything could be over. When the first light of dawn finally cut through the canopy, I bolted upright, throat raw from a night of silent panic. My hands shook as I unzipped the tent, stiff as if they no longer belonged to me. Outside, the ground was damp with morning dew. I scanned the clearing, and my stomach dropped. The footprints from the night before were gone. Not a trace of the circles I had heard, but in their place were new ones. These prints were closer pressed right up against the edges of my tent, as if someone or something had been standing only inches from me while I slept. Worse still, some impressions sank deep into the earth, crushing the soil as if made by something impossibly heavy. My skin crawled with the thought that no ordinary human could have left them. No birdsong, no wind. Just me, those unnatural tracks, and the rising panic pounding in my chest. I knew then I couldn't stay another second. I packed in a frenzy, hands shaking so badly I fumbled even the simplest knots. Every time I lifted my head, I swore I felt eyes peering at me from behind the massive hemlocks. My plan had been to spend one more night, but that didn't matter anymore. My survival instincts screamed louder than anything else. Get out now. I shoved everything into my pack without caring if it was neat. In under 10 minutes, I was ready to move. No breakfast, no rest. I didn't even dare glance back at the campsite as I left, afraid I might see something standing exactly where I had just slept. As I stepped back onto the trail, I noticed something unsettling. The morning light seemed dimmer, washed out, no longer bright and crisp the way it should have been. With every step farther from camp, my heart hammered harder, as if it wanted to tear free from my chest. I had only one goal left: get out of the forest as fast as possible. I pushed my pace on the familiar trail, trying to calculate how many miles remained before I'd reach the gravel lot. But after only a few miles, something impossible happened. The path I knew by heart was gone. Right in front of me, a brand new fork appeared, like the entire forest had rearranged itself overnight. I froze, pulse racing, racking my brain for the mental map I'd carried so many times before. There had never been a split here, not once. Panicked, I pulled out my GPS. The screen showed my coordinates clearly, but what it displayed made my blood run cold. According to the device, I was standing in the middle of a large lake, but around me there was nothing, only trees, dry ridgelines, and rocky ground. No water, no lake, nothing. I tried to backtrack, retracing the steps I had just taken, but the trail behind me no longer matched what I'd walked only minutes earlier. Every time I turned around, the forest looked different, shifting and twisting itself like a living maze, pushing me deeper, farther from any way out. And then the realization hit me like a weight. I wasn't choosing the path anymore. The forest was choosing it for me. Reeling from that thought, I stumbled forward through the undergrowth, scanning for any landmark. That's when I saw it standing perfectly still on a ridge about 200 yards away. A tall figure, straight-backed, dressed head to toe in black, so dark it seemed to swallow the light around it. I froze. My heartbeat pounded like war drums, while my hand instinctively clenched the strap of my pack. Summoning every ounce of courage, I raised a hand and shouted, voice cracking, "Hello? Is someone there?" My call echoed through the trees, bounced off the ridge, and died into nothing. The figure didn't move. Not a twitch. Not a sound. It only stood there, staring at me. And even at that distance, I could feel it. That gaze wasn't just from the outside. It pierced inward, drilling into me, weighing down each beat of my heart. In that moment, I knew this wasn't some lost hiker or local wanderer. This was something else. Something not entirely human. I couldn't think. I couldn't plan. My survival instinct took over with a single command: run. Now. I bolted off the trail, crashing headfirst into the dense undergrowth, thorns and branches tearing at my clothes, slashing across my arms and face. Dry leaves and snapping branches screamed in my ears as I tore through the forest, My clothes were ripped open, my pack snagged on branches and cut into my shoulder. I crashed hard onto the root-covered ground, my knees and palms burning raw from scrapes. But I didn't stop. I forced myself back up, lungs heaving, breath tearing out of me like it was breaking my chest apart. And yet, no matter how fast, how frenzied I ran, the footsteps were still there. Not rushing, not stumbling. Just that steady, deliberate rhythm, following me with the patience of something that knew it didn't need to hurry. Every impact of that sound slammed into my mind like a hammer, each one saying the same thing. It knows you'll run out of strength. It knows you can't escape. Each time I tripped and went down, I swore the distance closed, like it was only a few paces away, just waiting to reach out and touch my back. Panic erased all sense of direction. I didn't know if I was going north, south, deeper into the mountains, or closer to the edge. All I could do was run, clinging to the desperate hope that somehow, somewhere, I'd break free. But always, behind me, that chilling soundtrack. The footsteps, steady, slow, relentless, carved themselves deeper into my mind, like a song of fate I couldn't outrun. I don't know how long I ran. Time blurred into a void of pounding heartbeat and ragged breaths. My legs went numb. My hands bled from bracing every fall. And then just when I thought my body was going to collapse completely, I stumbled out of the tangled brush, and there it was, a gravel road, stretching gray and silent through the trees. I froze, chest heaving, eyes wide in disbelief. A road. Even if I didn't recognize it, it meant one thing. I had made it out of the maze. I staggered forward onto the gravel, every step heavy as lead, but I forced myself to keep going. Not far ahead, I saw a faint light, the warm glow of a porch lamp spilling from a small wooden house by the roadside. My throat was dry and raw, but I tried to yell. What came out was nothing more than a broken rasp. I dragged myself to the door and pounded on it with the last of my strength. A resident opened it, eyes widening as they looked me over. Torn clothes, skin streaked with mud and blood, chest heaving like I'd been chased by something no one should ever see. They didn't ask questions. They just grabbed the phone and called the sheriff. Standing there under that yellow light, trembling uncontrollably, I realized I had gotten out. But the sense of being watched hadn't left me at all. 2 days later, the sheriff's office called. The search team had located my Jeep right where I had parked it, but what they told me next sent ice straight through my veins. My tent was still there, but empty. Every bit of food I had packed for 3 days, and several pieces of my camping gear, were gone. Not scattered, not dragged off by animals, but missing in a way that felt organized, as if someone had taken their time and used them. The deputy told me that, judging by the signs left behind, it looked like someone had been camping there for weeks, cooking, sleeping, living in my gear, as if it had been theirs all along. But that was impossible. I had only been in those woods for 2 days. I couldn't answer their questions. I couldn't explain how my supplies vanished, or why my tent carried the marks of being lived in for so long. All I knew was this: something out there stepped into my space, used my belongings, and somehow, time itself had been bent. I've been out of those mountains for years now, but the aftermath has never left me. I'm convinced something in those ridges wanted me to stay, something not marked on maps, something that leaves no ordinary tracks, but is always present in the heaviest silences. I've tried moving not once, but several times, even to different states. Yet the feeling of being watched clings to me everywhere. At night, I still sense invisible eyes pressing through the walls, fixing on my back until sleep is impossible. There are nights, alone in my apartment, when I swear I can smell it. The faint scent of hemlock wood and mountain air drifting under my door as if the Appalachian forest itself had reached inside. 3 years have passed, and I still jolt awake, drenched in cold sweat, heart racing from nightmares that never change. My family thinks I'm imagining it, that I've let fear take root. But I know better. I know every detail of what I saw in that hollow was real, and I believe this with absolute certainty. Deep in the Appalachian Mountains lie ancient things that should have stayed buried forever, but somehow I stumbled into one of them. I have to start with a warning. There are places you'll find online that look way too cheap to be real. Places most of us would assume are just an amazing deal. But the truth is, they're cheap because no one ever comes back to leave a complaint. I've seen the name pop up more than once in rental listings. Whispering Pines Retreat. Thanks for watching. At first glance, it looks like the perfect mountain cabin dream perched on a ridge, floor-to-ceiling windows opening onto mist-covered valleys, a hot tub on the deck, and a view that convinces you this will be the trip of a lifetime. But I need to say this, especially to anyone who ever stumbles across that cabin. Don't book it. Don't go. I stayed there, and what happened during the anniversary weekend that should have been the happiest time of my life nearly turned me and my husband into the next names trapped inside that house forever. It was our 5th wedding anniversary. After years of long hours and saving every dollar, Jake and I finally allowed ourselves a real getaway. We wanted something special, a secluded cabin in the Smoky Mountains. Just the two of us, far from the city and everyday pressure. When I scrolled through rental sites, one listing stood out. Whispering Pines Retreat. The photos looked flawless. A log cabin built into the mountainside, massive glass windows framing the valley, a golden afternoon light spilling across the wooden deck, and a hot tub waiting outside. Exactly the kind of place any couple would choose without hesitation. But what shocked us most was the price. It was less than half of what similar places in the area were charging. Too cheap to ignore, I told myself. The website itself felt strange. Sparse, almost empty. Just a few short sentences describing the property. No reviews, no company name, no phone number, only a booking form and a single email address. I told myself maybe it was brand new, no one had stayed there yet, so we booked it immediately. The confirmation email we got back was odd. Just one line. Thank you for choosing Whispering Pines. Enjoy your stay. You were having modest words obtained. No check-in instructions, no door code, no contact info. When Jake tried replying to ask for details, the email bounced back instantly. Looking back, those red flags should have been enough for us to cancel and pick somewhere else. But at the time, all we thought was, this is finally the romantic trip we've been waiting for. When we finally arrived, the cabin looked exactly like the photos online. It sat in a small clearing in the woods, polished timber shining, a thin plume of smoke rising from the stone chimney, and warm yellow light glowing from the windows. For a moment, I let out a breath of relief. At least the place was real. But only a few seconds later, I realized something was very, very wrong. There was no sound at all. No birdsong, no insects, not even wind moving through the trees. The entire forest was wrapped in a silence so thick, it almost felt like you could touch it. Jake noticed too, and whispered, "That's strange. This time of year, the Smokies should be buzzing with cicadas and crickets." Inside the cabin, everything was prepared to the point of being unsettling. The refrigerator was packed with fresh food we had never requested. On the kitchen counter sat loaves of bread still warm, jars of local honey, and bottles of wine that looked like they'd been aged for decades. When I opened the closet, my stomach dropped. Inside were clothes in our exact sizes, mine and Jake's. Not just shirts and dresses, but shoes, jackets, even sleepwear. As if someone already knew we were coming, knew our measurements, and had everything waiting for us. Jake forced a nervous laugh. Maybe this is some kind of premium service. Some places do that. But I couldn't shake the strange feeling seeping into every breath I took. I pulled out my phone to text my mom, just to let her know we'd arrived safely. The screen only showed those 3 cold words. No service. Wi-Fi? Nothing, despite the website's promise. Standing in that well-lit but deathly quiet cabin, I couldn't escape the thought. It felt like this place had been waiting for us. That first night, I couldn't sleep. The silence pressed in on me, and those huge glass windows looked out onto a wall of solid black forest, like a curtain sealing us off from the world. I kept tossing, the sound of my heartbeat louder than anything else in the house. Around 3 in the morning, I got up to close the curtains. When my eyes swept over the darkness outside, the blood in my body froze. Between the trees, there were lights. Not flashlights, not headlights. They were soft, flickering, almost like candlelight, floating a few feet above the ground. And what terrified me most was the way they moved slowly, deliberately, in perfectly straight lines. Like a procession, I pressed my hands against the window frame, barely daring to breathe. The lights drifted past, shifting positions at the exact same time, like some kind of rehearsed performance. No footsteps, no rustling wind, just the void, and those pale, cold glows threading through the trees. Shaking, I called for Jake and shook him awake. "Jake, look, out there." He stumbled to the window, rubbing his eyes. But the moment he looked out, the lights were gone. Completely. The forest was silent again, as if nothing had ever been there. Jake set a hand on my shoulder, trying to calm me. "You're probably just overtired, light tricks, or maybe fireflies." But deep down, I knew what I saw. And whatever it wasn't fireflies. I didn't answer him, because deep down, I knew those weren't fireflies. I had seen something else. Something moving out there with structure, with intent, and it knew we were watching. The next morning, while tidying up the living room, I noticed a heavy leather-bound book sitting on the coffee table. I was certain it hadn't been there the night before. I opened it. The first pages dated back to the 1970 seconds. The handwriting was neat, elegant, full of excitement. Beautiful scenery. The perfect honeymoon cabin. So peaceful, we wish we could stay here forever. The sapted nos. But as I flipped further, the tone began to shift. In the middle entries, vague complaints appeared. Dreamed of someone standing at the foot of the bed. Can't shake the feeling of being watched. The closer the entries came to the present day, the shakier the handwriting became. Sentences broke off halfway. Some pages ended mid-thought, as if the writers had been interrupted. And then I reached the most recent page. The handwriting was jagged. The ink smudged as if scribbled in panic. Day 12. We were supposed to leave yesterday, but the car won't start. Jake says we should hike down the mountain, but the trails always lead us back. The cabin doesn't want us to leave. If someone finds this book, please don't stay past your checkout. Don't let it keep you. I sat frozen, the book trembling in my hands. And for some reason, out of all the unfamiliar names scrawled across those pages, my eyes kept catching on. One in particular, a name written again and again. And this time, it was mine. After reading those words, I begged Jake that we had to leave immediately. We didn't pack much, just the car keys, a few snacks, and a flashlight. I didn't care what comforts the cabin had left waiting for us. I only knew I had to get out. The trail sloped steeply downward, the dirt still damp with morning dew. I forced my steps steady, my heartbeat pounding in my chest. The woods were unnaturally quiet, no birds, no wind, only the sound of our breathing echoing in the stillness. We walked for nearly 3 hours. I knew we were heading south. My small compass kept pointing that way. But when the trees began to thin, opening up to a clearing ahead, my stomach sank. And then, my heart plummeted. We were standing right back in front of the same cabin. The heavy wooden door, the stone porch, the towering glass windows staring out into the forest, it was all there. Exactly as if we had never left. "No way," I whispered, a chill crawling down my spine. I turned to Jake, expecting the same horror that was twisting inside me. But he just shrugged, his eyes distant, his voice flat. "Maybe you're mistaken. This cabin is great. Why would we want to leave so soon?" His tone was hollow, monotone, stripped of the warmth I knew. The words didn't sound like they were really his. I looked deep into his eyes, and in that moment, I wasn't sure if Jake was even still himself. That afternoon, while Jake sat silently in front of the fireplace with that vacant stare, I decided to explore the cabin on my own. I pulled open the heavy wooden door leading down to the basement. The hinges groaned with a sharp, grating screech that echoed in the stillness. Darkness swallowed the stairwell. I switched on my flashlight, its weak yellow beam sweeping over broken chairs, a rotting wooden table, and dust-covered boxes. And then, behind the clutter, I saw a wall. I stepped closer, my heart tightening in my chest. Pinned to the wall were dozens of photographs. Each one showed a smiling couple posed in front of this exact cabin. The clothing and hairstyles changed through the decades, flowery dresses from the 70 seconds, big hair from the 80 seconds, then clear modern snapshots. My hands shook as I flipped through them, and then I froze. Right in the center was the newest photo, still crisp and bright. It was me and Jake. We were standing on the cabin's porch, holding hands, smiling into the camera. I was wearing a dress I'd never seen before, and Jake was in a sweater that wasn't part of our luggage. Beneath the photo, written in elegant, careful ink, "The Richardsons, October 2024. They decided to stay forever." My throat closed. I stumbled back, the flashlight trembling in my grip, its beam dancing across rows of frozen smiles staring back at me. In that instant, I understood the cabin wasn't just a place to stay. It was a place that kept the people who walked inside forever. When I returned to the living room, Jake was still in the exact same spot by the fire. The flames flickered in his eyes, but there was no life in them anymore. Just emptiness, staring past me into something I couldn't see. "Jake," I whispered, shaking his shoulder, my voice trembling. "We have to leave. This cabin isn't safe." He turned slowly, the corners of his mouth stretching into a faint, empty smile. "Why would we leave? It's perfect here. We have everything we need." His voice was flat, mechanical, like a line rehearsed too many times, words fed to him by something else. I stepped back, a slow rising horror building inside me. The cabin was doing something to Jake. It wasn't just holding us here with looping trails or a car that wouldn't start. It was draining his will, turning our very presence into something it could feed on. I could feel it. The wooden walls seemed to breathe. The cabin was absorbing our private moments, our happy memories, our love and closeness. It was feeding itself on the bond between couples until they no longer wanted to leave or no longer remembered they had ever lived anywhere else. Watching Jake sitting there, the familiar light fading from his eyes, I realized if I didn't act soon, the cabin would take him from me forever. That night, I couldn't sleep. The air inside felt heavy, suffocating, colder even though the fireplace still burned. Then, I heard it, the voices. At first faint, like wind slipping through the mountains, then clearer, sharper, flat, hollow voices, each syllable pronounced with chilling precision, calling my name, calling Jake's name. Men's voices, women's voices, blending together into a dreadful chorus, emotionless and relentless. I rushed to the window. Out in the darkness, hazy figures drifted between the trees, moving slowly but steadily toward the cabin. Jake was already at the door, his hand gripping the knob, his eyes vacant like he was under a spell. "Emily," he said in that flat tone. "They're waiting for us. They want us to come outside." He was instated. I tore his hand away, shouting, but my voice was drowned in the chorus, echoing through the forest. I ran to the car. The headlights flickered on, but when I turned the key, the engine groaned, sputtered, and died. I tried again, and again, each time, only the cold grind of metal. I clutched my phone. The screen mocked me with the same words. No service. No way out. In pure desperation, I remembered the guest book. I grabbed it, flipping through frantic scribbles until I reached the page with our names. The photo. The neat handwriting. The Richardsons. October 2024. My hands shook as I ripped the pages out and threw them into the fire. The paper caught instantly, the acrid smell of smoke filling the room. As the last fragments curled into ash, the cabin shuddered violently. The voices outside twisted into furious screams, echoing across the mountains. Jake collapsed to the floor, then suddenly lifted his head. His eyes cleared, the light returning, as if he'd just woken from a long, dark dream. "Emily, what's happening? Where was I just now?" I couldn't answer. I only knew one thing. The cabin had lost its grip on us, at least for tonight. The moment the pages with our names turned to ash in the fireplace, the entire cabin shuddered violently. The wooden beams groaned and cracked as if they were being twisted from the inside. The ceiling lights flickered wildly, then went out, leaving only the suffocating dark broken by the frantic glow of the fire. Outside, the chorus of voices erupted into a storm of sound, no longer steady and monotone, but sharp, distorted like the entire forest was screaming in rage at losing its prey. The windows rattled in their frames, curtains whipping violently in a wind that didn't exist. Jake suddenly bolted upright. His eyes were clear again, wide with panic. "Emily, we have to go now." We tore out into the warped darkness. I threw what little we had left into the car. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst as I twisted the key once more, and this time, the engine roared to life, echoing like salvation. The tires bit into the gravel, and we sped down the mountain road. In the rearview mirror, I saw the cabin one last time, its frame shuddering, lights inside flickering weakly before fading. Slowly, the entire structure dissolved into the heavy fog, as if it had never existed at all. And yet, even as the distance grew, I couldn't shake the feeling it was still watching us. Something not cabin, not human. Something bigger, older, relentless, etching our presence into its memory. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen. I used to be a wildlife biologist. For 8 years, I ventured into the most remote parts of the Appalachian wilderness, studying the populations of large mammals and threatened species. My specialty was tracking animals through science, analyzing prints, setting up trail cameras, using GPS collars to map patterns of movement. I once believed everything could be explained through data, numbers, and evidence, until I was offered what seemed like the opportunity of a lifetime. A major grant came through to study black bear populations in the most isolated reaches of the Smoky Mountains. There were rumors of a previously unknown subspecies bears so cut off they may have developed entirely unique traits, confirming it would change conservation policy and potentially expand protections across tens of thousands of acres. The study zone covered over 15,000 acres, so remote it could only be reached by helicopter or a 2-day hike. I was dropped off with 2 months of supplies, dozens of trail cameras, and enough GPS equipment to map out the movements of everything living there. When the helicopter lifted away, the sound of its blades fading into nothing, I was left standing alone in the heart of Appalachia. Around me stretched an endless sea of trees, wind hissing across the ridgelines, and a sky so wide it made me dizzy. I truly believed this was going to be the most important research of my career. But what I didn't realize was that this project wasn't designed to track bears. It was designed to track me. The first week went exactly as I expected. The trail cameras captured deer, wild boar, raccoons, and a healthy population of black bears. GPS collar data looked completely normal, territories well-defined, activity cycles matching textbook patterns. I logged my notes, stored the data, confident this study would strengthen my scientific record. But by the second week, everything changed. I found massive tracks along a creek, about 5 miles from my base camp. They looked like bear prints, but far too large. The claw marks dug deep into the soil, longer than anything I'd ever documented. I measured the stride so wide it could only belong to a creature standing at least 8 feet tall. That's larger than any grizzly, a species not supposed to exist anywhere in the southeastern United States. I poured plaster to cast the prints, photographed them from multiple angles, and ran comparisons through wildlife databases. No results. The closest match I found were cave bear tracks, a species that's been extinct for over 20,000 years. Then the trail cameras began sending back footage that defied everything science could explain. A black bear walked into frame, but instead of moving on all fours, it rose upright, walking steadily on 2 legs with perfect balance, more like a human than an animal. A herd of deer appeared, but instead of scattering, they moved in formation, every step synchronized like a trained military unit. And the birds, they flew in geometric patterns so precise, I thought I was watching an air show rather than wild migration. Every clip I reviewed sent a chill crawling across my skin. I had built my career proving that animal behavior followed natural biological rules. But here, deep in the Appalachian wilderness, I was witnessing something that didn't belong to any science I knew. I poured plaster into the prints, photographed them, and ran comparisons through every database I had access to. Nothing matched. The closest result were cave bear tracks, an animal that went extinct more than 20,000 years ago. Then the trail cameras started sending back footage that no science could reasonably explain. A bear walked into frame, but instead of moving on all fours, it stood upright, walking steadily on 2 legs with perfect balance, more human than animal. A herd of deer appeared, but instead of scattering, they moved in flawless unison, every step synchronized like a trained military unit. And the birds, they flew in geometric formations so precise, I thought I was watching an air show instead of natural flight. Every clip I replayed made my skin crawl. I had built my career proving that animal behavior followed predictable biological rules. But here, deep in the Appalachian wilderness, I was watching something far beyond any science I'd ever known. I was still trying to steady my breathing when one of the so-called rangers in the valley suddenly stopped. Its entire body pivoted toward me with mechanical precision, like a machine receiving a command. Its eyes flared, catching the last light of the setting sun, and a voice rang out, not through a radio, not through speakers, but directly across the air. So sharp and clear, I heard every syllable. Dr. Chen. I froze. It knew my name. Thank you for accepting our invitation. The voice continued, flat and cold. Your research has helped us identify suitable specimens. This question, my stomach dropped, blood rushing in my ears. Every detail locked into place. The generous funding, the remote location, the 2 months of forced isolation. It hadn't been an opportunity. It was a trap. The figure stepped onto a rock ledge, its face perfect like a human mask, but the eyes betrayed a chilling emptiness. You understand animal behavior. That makes you the ideal candidate for our collection. Researchers are the rarest of all. Header, Abelite. My heart slammed in my chest, sweat breaking cold down my back. I didn't wait for another word. I spun, sprinting down the ridge, crashing through brush, abandoning every piece of equipment. Branches whipped across my face. Rocks slid beneath my boots. But I knew one thing: I had to get out. Behind me, I could hear them. Footsteps. Not running, not rushing, steady, relentless. The kind of pursuit that told me they were certain I would never escape.